right. So I'm going to go ahead and get started, everybody. So today I'm going to be talking a little bit about Ollama and yeah. Okay, so today I'm going to be talking a little bit about Ollama and open source AI, with focus on Drupal development. My name is Rich Lawson. I'm a senior director I'm a associate director of technology with Evolving Web, and you can see my contact information there. And what we're going to be talking about today is I want to provide a little bit of context for open source AI, just because I think for the overall talk it'll be really good to have that background, and there's some complexity with open source as it's applied to AI. So I'll talk a little bit about that. Also get into Drupal and its capabilities with AI. Talk about Ollama and get into Continue a little bit. Really briefly touch on the future and then any questions that people have. Real quick before we start though, I do want to mention that Evolving Web is a full-service digital agency that specializes in Drupal. We do training programs, and we also have an event series that we organize called Evolve Drupal. We actually have one coming up. I'll talk about that really briefly. But we work with world-class organizations and public institutions. And real quick, so June 6th coming up, we have an Evolve Drupal in Lawson. It's kind of like the Drupal camp kind of concept. So if you're interested, you can go to evolvedrupal.com or come and see me. We've got a booth outside. All right, so first we're going to talk a little bit about that context I mentioned with open source AI. So we're used to working with Drupal, right? And that's open source software, which makes it great for contributions and working with the community. I think that Dries did a great job of speaking to that, yesterday in terms of some of the different goals that we have. But what happens when you apply open source to AI? There's a little bit more complexity. And so one organization that has been trying to come up with a good definition for what open source AI is the Open Source Initiative, OSI. What they did is they spent a couple of years talking to different AI experts and working with the open source AI community. And these experts were from various fields. And then they basically took what they had found and they led a global design initiative to basically come up with this definition, which was published in October 2024. And ever since, they've been gathering up, endorsements from different organizations, such as, Mozilla, for example. Is this recording? Yeah, okay, it is. Sorry about that. And so the key to this open source definition is that it's really important that you be able to use AI for whatever you would like without having to get any permission at all. It's also really important that you be able to study and look into the different components, such as how the training code was run. You could see the actual code and having transparency into the actual training data. And with open source AI, you should be able to change the system however you want for any purposes. And then finally, you should be able to share the system with anybody that you would like. So it's beyond the scope of the talk a little bit, but I did want to mention that there are others that are, basically coming up with different definitions and proposals for open source AI. But overall, I think that the key kind of takeaway from this is that there is a little bit of debate about whether or not models that claim to be open source actually are. And so, when you're working with open source models, make sure that you review any licenses, depending on what it is that you're trying to do. You just want to make sure that the licensure is in line with what you want to accomplish. So, for example, if we take a look at Ollama, and we look at their particular license, it makes it to where you're able to use it, from an open source perspective, but there are these restrictions. So one example of that is that this is a really nice problem to have, right? But if you have more than 700 million active users, then you can't that's a restriction on it. There's also different things, from the perspective of training other models and improving other models that are restricted with that license. But there are some fully open models out there. So one example is Omo 2. And you can run that with Ollama as we get into that here shortly. And so you can see the different ways in which it is fully open. So the training data is accessible and open, the training code as well, and you can also reproduce different training recipes. And any of the evaluations that are done for it are also transparent. And so one of the things I really like about this graph is that it shows the array of different levels of open source. So there are other models besides OMO 2 that are fully open. For example, DCLM 7B that you see there toward the left is from Apple, and there are others that are within a range. So there are some that are partially open, as well as others where it's just like basically the weighting mechanisms are the only part that are open. So you can kind of see that there is this range. There's almost like a sliding scale in terms of openness. And overall, why should we care, right? So if you work with AI, it's very easy to pay a fee and put your token in, and you can be off and running with it. So there are different advantages and disadvantages. So for example, from an advantage perspective, there is transparency, like we talked about before, things like the training data, what actually went into it, what are considerations that you might have from a copyright perspective that you would want to think about. There's privacy, right? So if you have a client, for example, who really wants their data to not live in the cloud and they're worried about their data training other models, that can be a consideration and an advantage to running an open source model that you would have control over. Then there's the community and collaboration aspect, right? In the Drupal world, we really understand this. So there's Discords, there's all sorts of different ways to participate in the process with open source AI that you can take advantage of. If you want to do some customization, we're going to talk a little bit later about finding different models. You can actually participate in that, which also has some democratization aspects. And then you'll notice that there are definitely caveats to these, right? So cost is in both columns. I didn't make a mistake there. Because on the one hand, you're not having, if you're running it locally, for example, you're not having to pay anything because you've just got the model local and you're running it. But on the other hand, we'll talk about on the disadvantage side, if you have like an infrastructure that you're setting up, or like you have to purchase more resources, even for your local machine, there is that cost aspect there. There's also the expertise requirements, because it's a little bit more it's more involved, right, to get this all figured out and to get everything situated. And there's IP limitations for models that are used commercially. I kind of talked about that a little bit with Llama 3. And then, again, with the resource requirements, so you may end up running a model that has, like less tokenization or quantization because you are running it locally and you just don't have enough resources available. And so you may end up with, a little bit lower quality than you would if you had one of the really large, robust models. And then, based on that, the quality can vary a little bit. And, we had already talked about the cost. So I wanted to make sure to have that background. Since we're talking about open source AI, there's that complexity there. But there's a lot of really great things happening with Drupal and AI. And as we get into talking about Ollama and Continue, I wanted to make sure that just to provide a little bit of background on that too. So for Drupal's AI capabilities, one of the really great things that had happened is, Dries mentioned yesterday that there's this AI initiative, right, to improve things and continue to bring more into Drupal. But one of the things that was really good kind of leading up to this is that, like, for example, with the providers that you have where you can connect to different AI models, there was a lot of work done to kind of make that a little bit more consistent and consolidated, so that's really good. But in terms of, using Drupal in terms of, from an AI perspective. Oh, sorry, here. Let me get rid of this. Okay. So from the perspective of different tools that are available, you have AI Explorer, which is a tool to test out your prompts. And so you can see a screenshot of that over to the right there, in terms of providing you with the ability to kind of test out different models. Like in the right rail there, you can see that you can select the different models. And on the left, you have the ability to basically change your prompt and test out and see how it works. There are also AI automators. So this is the automators allow you to basically update and populate fields in Drupal. And there's an integration with ECA, which is really great. If you want to learn more about that, there was a really great talk at DrupalCon that you can see. I'm going to provide an upload of these slides, so you'll see links throughout, so you'll be able to access all that if you want to learn more about any of these like little offshoots. From an AI search perspective, even though it's experimental right now, there's some really good things happening in terms of the integration with Search API, which is, anybody who's worked with Apache Solr or Elasticsearch, Search API is really great to connect in, so you can keep things consistent there. And then again, there is a really great talk that actually happened at Evolve Drupal Toronto. So I have a link to it there, where it was basically going through and talking about how you would set up the embedding, for a model and set up your vector database. It was using Pinecone and get everything set up to where you can run, AI search in a Drupal site. So that was really good. And then there's a lot of different providers. So kind of going outside, just talking about the obviously Ollama, which we're going to be talking about, is one of the providers available. But there are other providers that you can use that you can connect in with a lot of different models there. Dries, I think, you spoke to the fact that Drupal was really early to being able to connect to, OpenAI, with ChatGPT and everything. I think that speaks to, the capabilities of giving you a lot of different options, depending on what your needs are. And there's a growing ecosystem, surrounding AI. So just to kind of highlight a few, agents can help you actually do the site building in Drupal, which is really helpful. And it can be really great to learn, right? Because you can see and it'll give you instructions on what to do. We're going to talk a little bit more about image alt text, but it can be really helpful to editors to make their imagery more accessible. Translations, we actually did a webinar on this recently, where there's really great ways to add automated translations for a Drupal site that can also be worked into your workflow. For example, do you want translations to be automatically generated as soon as the content is added or edited? That's one of your options. You also have the, you can make sure that everything is human reviewed. That's part of your workflow. And so those are really powerful capabilities that you have where you can integrate at various levels translations in. SEO, if you use Drupal CMS, a lot of that's already baked in to where when you're working within CK Editor, you can have it evaluate your SEO. And then images, where you can integrate in with things like Stable Diffusion and other models to basically generate imagery. Okay, so now we're going to talk about Ollama, so kind of leveraging all of that information about open source AI and Drupal's AI capabilities. We're going to dive into this. In terms of what is Ollama? It's an open source platform that allows you to run large language models or LLMs locally. And one thing that's a little bit confusing about it, I think, is that a lot of people could associate. You may have heard of Llama, and so Llama is an LLM by Meta that you can run through Ollama, but Ollama is its own organization, its own tool. So I just want to make sure that since they're so similar, there may be some confusion there. And so it focuses on ease of use and privacy, and it also provides a library itself for a lot of different popular LLMs that you can use. So how do you install it? My preferred method is to use Homebrew because I use that very frequently on Mac OS. But you can also use Homebrew elsewhere too. So you can just do a brew install Ollama command and that'll get it going. But you also have the option of going out to ollama.com/download and you can download an installer that will take care of that for you. It does run through the command line, so you will have to go into your terminal at some point. But you can get started very easily and just run that Ollama run llama2 command, and you can interact with, it'll ask you, it'll give you a prompt, and you can start interacting with it right away. So in terms of the most used commands that you would be using as you're using Llama, If you run Ollama itself, you can get help where it gives you all the different commands. If you do a pull, it'll pull the model down locally. You can see some examples there. If you wanted to grab Quen or Llama 3, you can pull that down. If you do a run, it'll automatically do a pull for you, but maybe you don't want to run it right away, so you just are running the pull command. If you run the list, you'll see all of the models that you've downloaded. The PS command shows any that are running, currently on your, wherever you're running Ollama. And then RM is how you can get rid of models. Like maybe you're doing a lot of experimentation, you're running out of disk space, whatever the case might be, you can go ahead and remove those. So how do you find models for Ollama? You can go to ollama.com/search, and it's a very simple interface. You can see a screenshot, and I'm going to show a quick example of searching for things with ollama.com and also Hugging Face. But there are some screenshots there to the right. Hugging Face is a way to find even more models. So you can see that Ollama is really focused on being, very user-friendly. You've got a few filters at the very top, but for the most part, it's just kind of a simple interface. Versus Hugging Face, you can really get into seeing a lot of different models. So with Hugging Face, it's basically a collaboration platform for the AI community to focus on models, data sets, and applications. And so it does enable you to find a variety of different models that can be specialized around specific needs. So if you're building like a custom app with Drupal and you want to be able to find something that is specific to a client's data set, that it would help you with that. Or if you're looking for vision models because you want to basically do what we're going to see here shortly with alt text, that would be really good. And the reason that GGUF is so you've got a lot of different filters and things that you can use. So you can filter by tasks, like if you want to do object detection. You can filter by libraries, data sets, like if you're really worried about where the data is coming from. If you're looking for English and or French, you can filter by language. And even with the licenses, it can help you a little bit if you're looking for a particular license. But overall, with the GGUF, that makes it really simple. It stands for GTP, Generated Unified Format. And that is basically, if you use Hugging Face and you filter by that, you will have models that you can use automatically in Ollama, and it'll give you everything that you need. You'll see that here in a second. So here is me using Ollama to basically find a model. And so you can see that basically it'll give you the command that you can run in your workspace, in your command line right away. And then if you want to change models, it'll update that for you. So you can see it's very simple to use and very straightforward. And then we'll move into Hugging Face, and you can see that there's a lot more going on here. And what you can do is basically, I'm going to filter by the GGUF because I want to make sure that the models that I'm seeing are easily, there's other things you can do, but when you're starting out, it's really easy because you can go and use the Ollama selector there, and you can pick from the different models. And again, it'll give you a command that you can use with Ollama to pull the model down. All right, so I wanted to provide a real-world example of using Ollama with Drupal. And so Drupal CMS is what I'm going to be using here, so that's where you would start if you wanted to follow this. And what I did is I updated to the dev version of the AI module and the dev version of Ollama Provider, just because I needed to have the latest and the greatest right now as things are continuing to develop. And then you can go through and enable and configure Ollama Provider. I'm going to show you an example of this, with the kind of the flow here in a minute. But basically, you can enable Ollama Provider, enable this AI image alt text. On the right here, you can see basically that's the configuration for the AI image alt text. And the two key fields that we're going to be really focused on are the provider model and the auto generation, but you can also come up with your own initial prompt. If you want to tweak things a little bit because you're not happy with the results, you can do that too. So here you'll be able to see, so this is Drupal CMS, and so I'm going through the whole process. So the only thing you're not seeing here is me grabbing through Composer, but you can actually use also Drupal CMS has ways of installing too, but I wanted to keep it short. So I enabled the two modules, the Ollama Provider and the image alt text module, and then I'm going to go through and configure them. So you can see here, because I'm using DDEV, I end up using that string that it provides you in terms of connecting to Ollama. And then I put in the port, and I save that, and then I can go over to the AI alt text generator here, module configuration, and basically select the model that I want to use. And also, I like to have it auto-generate, so it's just working right away. So that took care of the configuration. Now what I'm doing is I'm basically showing you, okay, I'm going to go ahead and upload an image of a parrot, and you can see that it generated some alt text for me right away that I can tweak, or I can generate additional alt text and basically go in and, like let's say that I don't like that it said red, I want it to be orange, that sort of thing. You have the control if you have human review of the alt text. One thing I want to note before we continue on is that Ollama is really good for like local and even like we're doing some experimentation with some different things using Ollama, but in terms of concurrency, there's probably a lot of work that you would need to do in order to get that to work well. So it's really something from a production tool perspective. There's other things you would want to take a look at. So Amazy has their AI offering right now that you can take a look at, and you can talk more with them about that, but they have the ability to run different sorts of models, including open source models. There's also AWS Bedrock, Azure, Google, they have their offerings, and then Beam.cloud is an alternative that you can take a look at. And then if you are going to be running this like on-prem, or if you're going to set up like your own VM or your own EC2 instance, you could take a look at VLLM to basically run things locally. And again, I don't want to get too deep on that for this talk, but I wanted you to be aware of the fact that that is the situation. All right, so next we're going to talk a little bit about Continue. So basically with Continue, there's the website for it. It's an extension so when you're a developer and you're using your integrated development environment or your IDE, it basically is something that you can install that will help you. It provides coding assistance. And Continue is an open source tool, and you basically hook it up to a lot of different AI models. You don't have to use open source. You can use whatever you'd like. But I'm going to be focused, of course, on the open source aspect of it. One of the things that's really great is it integrates with VS Code and with JetBrains, PHP Storm, and any Drupal developer will know that those have really great support, instructions in terms of how you can set up all sorts of different things that are really helpful to development, within the IDE. And so there's some main capabilities there where you can use its chat capabilities. It's kind of like if you've only used ChatGPT, it's kind of a similar sort of interface where you have like a left rail. You'll see a little bit of that here shortly, where you can basically talk with it and ask it questions, and then that way you don't have to go outside your IDE, so it's helpful. There's also autocomplete capabilities when you're actually working in a file. So a lot of people are aware that when you use your IDE, you can have it kind of from a PHP perspective or from a Drupal perspective kind of autocomplete like a line of code. Well, this can help you with entire sections where it'll make recommendations of like what it thinks you would need next, which is helpful. And then, kind of like from that editing perspective, like within a single file, it's kind of, somewhat related. And then there's also an agent that can perform a variety of different tasks. So, for example, I'm going to be showing you how it can generate some code. So installation is really easy. You can see VS Code on the left and PHP Storm on the right. So it's an extension in VS Code and a plugin in JetBrains. So it's really straightforward if you have ever added anything to either of those tools. And then from an installation perspective, I wanted to show so you have Continue installed in your IDE. So how would I'm using VS Code for all of these demos and everything that I'm going to show. So how would you get Ollama integrated into that? So you can see here, quickly that once you have, Continue installed, then what you can do is you can click on, the icon here, and that'll open up this particular, part of the it'll open up that sidebar. And what you can do is you can then pick, so there's a lot of different providers, like I said before. You just pick Ollama, and then what you do is you basically can then pick your models that you would want to use. What I like to do is if you have it be, I don't know that that's showing up very well on there, but what that says is, thanks for the lights. Basically, I think it's variable, if I remember the name, but what that'll do is any of the models that you have installed locally, you can select from those. So for certain kinds of tasks, you might want to use, Clem, versus another model. Maybe you're using Llama for certain things. So you can basically pick and choose. So it'll update your config file and allow you to pick from those, and that's what I'm showing here is that you can basically pick from. I think I picked Clem 2.5 right there. All right, so I'm going to show a demo of basically using the assistant to apply, some changes. So you can see a prompt that I have the prompt there where I'm basically asking it to create a module with some additional detail. And you can see that what it does is it basically, in this mode, spits out all, it provides you with all of the different instructions of like how to go about doing that. And so what I was doing is basically going in, and I already had I'll probably replay that real quick, but I already had my YAML file for my module opened up. And so I went to the first step. Like, think of it if you're like beginning development or you've never created a Drupal module before, you can kind of use this to help and like just kind of do things in phases or in steps so that it may help you make more sense of what you would do to basically build a module. So code commenting. So for this one, what we're going to see is basically me selecting a set of some code in one of the modules that I worked on. And basically what this does is I already have some code comments in here, and I thought that would be interesting because you can kind of see what it will do to handle that. You can see that it's putting comments in, it's actually changing some of my comments. And so with that, you can basically go through and I didn't quite catch it. Let me see if I can go back here and pause it. But there we go. So you can kind of see here that, maybe a little further. Let's see. Okay, so that should be good. So, for example here, it'll provide some recommendations, and you can see that, like, maybe it's something simple like if not found, and you like that a little bit better. So you just hit the accept or reject. This would be very familiar to you if you ever do any kind of, conflict resolution. It's very similar in terms of the interface, so it allows you to have that granular level of control. And then you would also want to pay attention because it might just get to be a little bit too much, right? Some code is pretty much self-documenting, so you don't want to have it go overboard, but you can kind of go through and decide what you want to use. You could have it do a first run, or you could see what it would do, like with everything that you've gotten set up in terms of making some recommendations. All right, so then for the inline suggestions, you'll see here that maybe I should pause it for a second here. But you can see here that what I'm basically doing is I've got a route subscriber file open, and what I'm wanting to do is create that. So what I started to do, and this is what I was talking about, how it's providing you with some normal autocomplete in terms of like working with Drupal. But what you will see here is that as I'm typing in that. It basically, again, it's kind of doing the Drupal and the IDE, kind of the more traditional piece, but then it starts to basically anticipate what I'm going to need, and I can, it wasn't quite right, so I hit, the return button, and then I'm starting to get more and more to where, I was able to get, if we kind of go back here a little bit, a little further. But yeah, I mean, it's not going to be perfect, but it can provide that scaffolding for you to where, it's helpful, particularly, I think, if you're working in something that you haven't worked on before. So it'll just provide those recommendations for you, and then you can kind of tweak things and keep typing and keep what you want and get rid of what you don't need. Oh, question?
Just in general, continuous basic thought.
It's a video. I guess that I needed to do something there. Sorry about that, Chris.
That's right.
Yeah. So let me see if there's something. Like, let me try. Yeah, I think because it's a video. Yeah.
We'll get there.
Okay. All right. Then from a code generation perspective, this is an example. So you can see here that I provided a prompt where I'm saying, generate a Drupal. So we're still doing the route subscriber thing. I'm saying generate a Drupal route subscriber that allows me to alter the route defaults. I give it some context of, I want to focus on layout builder, add block, and update block, those collections for the routes. And so it's just basically going through and creating that for me. And you'll notice that your mileage is going to vary a little bit with this because for example, it left off where you're opening PHP and that sort of thing. So I add that in. Here you'll see a little bit later. And so basically, it was able to generate all that, and then what I did is, to get my, I accepted everything. So in this case, it's kind of nice because you can just do kind of a blanket accept if you want to, instead of having to go through individually. And then what you can do is basically, I added the PHP in, and then you can go through and obviously it's not called my layout builder module. So you're going to have to tweak things a little bit in order to get that to work correctly. All right. So another piece that I wanted to talk about is that, so Continue is a code assistant. There are others that are out there. Klein, which is formerly Claude Dev, is also available, and it's also open source. And I think there's been some different talks about using Klein. And so you can explore it as an alternative to using Continue. But I think one of the things to consider also is that these two tools are not mutually exclusive. So they kind of focus on they have different strengths and they focus on different things. And so you can basically combine the two together to have a good experience. So you may have heard of Cursor, and what Cursor is basically it's a fork of VS Code that adds in AI capabilities. And there's a subscription fee that's involved. It's something that you would probably end up wanting to basically subscribe to pretty quickly. It's like there's a free tier, but it's very, very limited, and you end up not you're going to use that up pretty quickly. And so from an open source perspective, I think it's important to consider that that you can do a lot of these things. Like you can get the very similar capabilities if you use VS Code, Cursor, and Klein. You would be able to find more information about doing that if you wanted to. But there are some benefits to doing that, from the perspective of supporting the from an open source perspective, and then also there's actually even some benefits if you just did decide to use Claude. You could have prompt caching and things like that. And then, also because you can use Ollama, which isn't a provider that you can use in Cursor, you would be able to do all of these open source sorts of things in terms of the different models. From a future perspective, just to talk about that briefly, so obviously there's been a lot of improvements in Drupal AI over time. Dries talked about yesterday the AI initiatives, so we're going to be seeing even more. And it sounds like, I think he had mentioned within the next couple of weeks there will be some news there, so definitely something to keep an eye out for. And from an AI search perspective, I'm pretty excited. That's something I want to look into. A lot of our clients have questions about search and want to improve their search all the time. Natural language processing, that sort of thing. One of the things that I didn't mention, when we were talking about the AI search, is that you can do things typically what you would want to do is categorize all of if we think of Umami, which a lot of people know, it's that recipe site for Drupal. You can add taxonomies and you can categorize all of the different types of food, where you could say, okay, all of these are Italian or Mexican or whatever the case might be. But with natural language processing and using AI, even without that categorization, it can have that understanding of exactly what would be, like, even though you didn't tag it, it can still find Italian food or Mexican food for you. So there's interesting things, and obviously that's a really simple use case, but there's interesting things that you can do there. And then, like last week, Ollama released a new engine with version 0.7.0, and that supports multimodal models. And so an example of that would be, like, let's say that you're asking location-based questions about a video. It will like be able to respond to that, and then you can even have follow-ups with it and kind of dive into further detail. So, like, I guess what is the takeaway from that is that all of these things, it's very rapid improvements and development. So definitely something to keep an eye on if you're interested in the all of what's going on. So yeah, at this point, if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer those. Chris.
What kind of hardware are you throwing at this thing?
So, obviously it depends. Like I have been doing some like experimentation with, actually using an NVIDIA card, mostly for like images and to kind of speed up the text. But my Mac has been running it, without any issues. I think I have 32 or 64 gigs of RAM. I'd have to check that out, but I think that MacBooks are pretty good. Go ahead, Chris.
Follow up.
Yeah.
When you say it in the sentence, I've been running it, which specific model are you talking about? How big is this model that you're running on your Mac?
Yeah, so I have been doing quite a bit with Quen. I would have to look at, are you talking about file size or are you talking about other things?
The distinction I'm making is that many models, including Quen, Quen 3, which just came out recently,
right,
when they come out with various sizes.
Right.
And some of them, especially on the high end, the really big models, there's no way in this reality I will ever afford the hardware to run a model of that size.
Right.
So,
yeah.
I'm interpreting your response to say, like, you basically said install Quen 3, and that gave you the common model instead of one of the giant ones.
Yeah, I haven't been trying to push the limits. I'll be honest with you there in terms of from a coding perspective. So yeah, when I was showing you before with Ollama, that selector tool, I am just typically using the default that it provides.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm not really trying to see exactly how far I can go with that part.
Which, for reference for the crowd, that's the 7 billion token model.
Right.
7 people.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So, and sorry, yeah, Chris's question, because I didn't put it in the mic, was just basically asking about the size of the different models and what kind of hardware that you would throw at it. I think you had your hand up first.
You mentioned that Ollama is not for production. Is that because of licensing or a technical restriction?
It's more just from the technical restrictions. Okay, so the question was Ollama not being for production. Is that a technical issue or is it licensing? It is open source, so it's not a licensing piece or restriction. It is just that, like, if you're trying to throw concurrent requests at it at the same time, like if you were wanting to use it in production, it's not really built for that.